He said, I'll be back in a few months. It's all going to be fine.
And just like that, Cintron and Foley parted ways. Foley leaving with a helmet lent to him by Cintron, and Cintron with the uncertainty of when they would meet again. Foley was headed to the small villages of Syria, wanting to capture the sometimes unattainable pockets where everyday people were victims of conflict. And Cintron knew that, but he also knew the risk behind it. But in November of 2012, Foley disappeared, his whereabouts, his fate unknown. For more than a year, it was like this. Cintron was in the dark, not knowing what could have possibly happened to his friend. But despite Foley's disappearance, Cintron trekked on, fulfilling the pact he and Foley made one day in the mountains of Afghanistan. Cintron began hiking the Appalachian Trail by himself in February of 2014. But as grandiose as the idea sounded, Cintron's determination would fall by the wayside at times, wondering whether he should stop the trip altogether.
But it does get monotonous at a certain point. It gets repetitive and mundane. So probably somewhere in Northern Virginia, I was thinking like, well, what am I proving just by walking 25 miles a day? You're cold, you're hungry, you're tired, your motivation is low. But I would always think about him in those times because he didn't even know. I never told him that I was about to do the Appalachian Trail. Always, my personal motivation was always like, well, if he was here with me, he definitely would push me to go one more day, one more week, one more mile.
And he didn't. In late July, Cintron reached the end of the trail atop Mount Katahdin in Maine. But despite the accomplishment, it was Foley who was forefront in his mind.
You know, when I got back home and I had access to a computer more readily, I would Google his name all the time. And you hear things like maybe they're going to release journalists over there once in a while, and his name was usually one of the first ones that came up. But there was just still no progress initially when I got home.
Then came August. Over in the Middle East, a new threat had been terrorizing Iraq as well as parts of Syria for months. The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, better known as ISIS, was looking to bring the entire Middle East under a regime of radical extremism through brutal measures of violence. In order to halt the spread of ISIS, the U.S. began bombing key locations that held ISIS supplies. However, it was what happened after the bombing that captured the world's attention.
A good friend of mine called me and said, I think you should come over on your way home from work. And he just looked at me for a few seconds, and he didn't want to tell me. But I had no idea what was going on. So he just handed me his laptop, and you know, it was open to an article about Foley. And when I initially saw it, I looked at it and just saw his name. And I assumed it was going to say that he was about to be released. So I didn't even keep reading the article. I stared at the title and I stared off and thinking like, wow, this is amazing. And my friend looked at me, but he just had a sad look about him.
James Foley had been beheaded by an ISIS fighter, filmed and posted to the internet. The New York Times headline read, "Militant group says it killed American journalist in Syria." For Cintron, it was a confusing moment of emotion.
So I think what made it a really hard blow was that I had just spent all this time on the Appalachian Trail thinking about him and praying for him, and really honestly expecting him to come home not too soon after I got back.
And then there was the image, a singular shot of Foley on his knees in an orange jumpsuit, his killer standing next to him with a knife.
There's nothing behind them for miles, it's just pure desert. And I just remember thinking like, wow, he has to feel so alone out there. You know, there's no one there that he knows or that he loves. And here he is with his captors really in the middle of nowhere facing death. And I think that he knew that that was coming, but I mean, he's a very brave guy. I was just upset, just really upset, because I knew when he was with us in Afghanistan, if we even came close to anything like that happening, you know, we would protect him, we would help him. But I couldn't do anything from here.
Foley is gone, and the nation is outraged. And while the world is searching for answers, Cintron is remembering Foley in the best way he can, as someone who was passionate about what he was doing, brave in the face of danger, and most importantly, a great friend.
When I think of him, he was in these places just out of love. He loves without boundaries. You know, he doesn't see people as Afghanis or Iraqis or Libyans or Americans. He just sees people. And we wouldn't have these conflicts if people saw each other like Jim saw people.